Okay, well, I'm excited to talk about this topic because I think it's important in any class that we talk about scientific research. And the topic is here, does scientific research have all of the answers? Well, let's start out with this interesting article. It says most research findings are probably false. So yes, we've spent a semester learning about research findings, finding these findings, talking about these findings in different um, areas, in a specific area for you. But this article, and I think it might actually be right, although I'm not exactly sure because it's hard to tell, most research studies that you have read are false. And here are some of the reasons. It says small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analyses, and flagrant conflicts of interest, obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance. And he says science has taken a turn towards darkness. Now you can read the rest of the article. I hope that you'll have access to the link here in the future. But it's interesting to start this topic out, I think, because hopefully it makes you think about how the research findings that we do have, despite all their dressing up as kind of a positive and influencing thing, are probably false. And this is why it's so important also for research studies to cite limitations, right? Talk about the limitations of the study. Talk about how maybe the method didn't show right, or there could be other explanations for the findings, and so forth. The work of Thomas Kuhn in his discussion on scientific paradigms, I think, is important as we talk about whether scientific research has all the answers. And he shares this thought: under normal conditions, the research scientist is not an innovator but a solver of puzzles, and the puzzles upon which he or she concentrates are just those which he or she believes can both be stated and solved within the existing scientific tradition. And Kuhn talks about how we are stuck in a scientific tradition. It doesn't matter, you can't choose, you can't get out of it in a lot of ways. Scientists are stuck in a scientific tradition, and they have really no way to break out of that scientific tradition until they go to a different paradigm. So what is a paradigm? It's just a certain way of thinking. And there are scientific paradigms all over the place when you go, especially you see them all over in the university setting when you learn about science and so forth. But there are scientific paradigms, and what that is basically is a way of thinking. And it's a way of thinking that we can't get out of. It's a way of thinking that we do all of our work in, all of our research is done within a specific paradigm. And so what has led to a paradigm? Well, on the diagram here, experiments lead to paradigms. So you have findings from experiments, and then they lead to ways of thinking. And then a paradigm, and this paradigm or ways of thinking leads to further experiments. And so we have a bunch of experiments done within a paradigm, and those experiments again stay within that paradigm in general. And this is what's called basic science or normal science by Kuhn. So another way to think about this is an analogy of a lamppost. So you might go to a parking lot at night, and you might see a person looking under a lamppost for her keys, maybe. And this woman is looking for her keys, and you say, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm looking for my keys under this lamppost." And you say, "Well, where did you lose your keys? Let me see if I can help you." And she might tell you, "Well, I lost them over there, way over there." Well, why are you looking under the lamppost? Well, because this is where the light is tonight. I can't see outside of the lamppost. And so, of course, it would be much more fruitful to look out elsewhere. But in this case, the person's stuck to the lamppost because they can't see beyond the area that they're in. And that is a good analogy of scientists within a specific paradigm. They're looking within that paradigm for answers. When unexpected results come, though, there could be a change in a paradigm, but there are a lot of reasons why this change is very slow. And one of those is that they're looking again in the lamppost. They're looking in a specific area for answers, and the answer is not given to them within that specific area. Another reason why the change could be slow is because we have gatekeepers in different scientific communities. And those are the people of some knowledge who allow us whether we can publish our results, whether we can talk about what we want to, and they don't want us to talk about outside of paradigm things. It's just the nature of scientific discovery. But eventually there can be changes in paradigms, and eventually there can be admittance that past paradigms were not correct. Think back on what your knowledge of past scientific discovery has been, and you realize that this is true, right? There are things that we believed many years ago and we believed them very dogmatically, meaning it's my way or the highway. This is the only way we can believe. But they have changed. We have gained better theory, and that's through, again, further experiments, further discovery in science. So eventually, very slowly, there's a change in the paradigm, and there may be an admittance that past paradigms were not correct. But this is just, as Kuhn mentions, this is just part of the scientific discovery process. But again, there are gatekeepers, and this is a gate being locked, right? There are people who stop you if you have some kind of new discovery or something that might be different, not within the current paradigm of thinking. Somebody is going to stop you. Somebody's going to not allow you to get past that. For instance, if I wish to publish an article, I have to have peer reviewers review that article. And these peers who review the article are people who are knowledgeable in the subject area, and they are likely within a scientific paradigm. And if my publication is not within that certain paradigm of thinking, I'm less likely to become published, or less likely to get that article to be published. So Thomas Kuhn talks about how change happens in these paradigms. He says almost always the men, and I should say and women, who achieve these fundamental inventions of a new paradigm have been either very young or very new to the field whose paradigm they change. So it's kind of interesting to think about what a difference can be made with somebody who's very young or very new, although it's hard to get past those gatekeepers of the paradigm, so to speak. So that's Thomas Kuhn's reference there. The structure of scientific revolutions is where these ideas come from. And I like this quote from Hugh Nibley, and he's actually a member of my church, the LDS Church. He says, until the final returns are in, and he was also a renowned scientist as well, until the final returns are in, no one is in a position to make final pronouncements. And as long as science continues to progress, the final returns will remain at the other end of a future of wonders and surprises. In the world of things, we must forever keep an open mind because we simply don't know the answers. And I think that is such an important attitude to take with scientific research, even with doing something like a literature review or reading. You have to approach it with an open mind because we don't know the answers. And I think this puts the idea of paradigms into a nice nutshell, where we really don't know. And a good scientist would be one who has an open mind, who's willing to have that wonder and surprise instead of a dogmatic point of view where this is what we believe. You cannot go outside of this area of belief. This also occurs within academia in general. So not just maybe scientific research, but in academia in general, there's a problem with maybe holding just one view. And this quote is from a Stanford News article, and this John Etchemendy, I think, is talking about how this happens in academia. He says, I'm actually more worried about the threat from within. Over the years, I have watched a growing intolerance at universities in this country, not intolerance along racial or ethnic or gender lines, rather a kind of intellectual intolerance, a political one-sidedness that is the antithesis of what universities should stand for. It manifests itself in the demands to disinvite speakers and outlaw groups whose views we find offensive, in constant calls for the university itself to take political stands. We decry certain news outlets as echo chambers, while we fail to notice the echo chamber we built around ourselves. So maybe you've noticed this as well, not just in scientific research, but in the academic community as well. Maybe you've had classes, professors who espouse a certain point of view and kind of outlaw or disinvite or don't allow certain points of view in the classroom, which might still be valid but are not part of maybe the existing paradigm or the existing way of thinking. Or maybe you've seen that universities should be called to take political stands on certain issues and to say no to other types of issues, or outlaw groups that that are found to be offensive by a certain group. So that's kind of what's happening, and this is a threat from within, I believe. But if scientific research may not have all of the answers, which I think it does have a lot of good answers for us, but it may not have all of the answers, what are some other sources that can guide us then? What other sources can guide us? So I've just listed a few here. Popular viewpoints and political debate can certainly guide us as we talk about how, popular viewpoints might be more people believe this, or politicians have debated this, and so it becomes the thing that we accept, or the answer that we need. But there are some certain problems with this, aren't there? I mean, if you think about popular viewpoints, I mean, if all of your friends jumped off a cliff, would you? That's a popular viewpoint. Or if everyone agreed that that property should be taken away from me as an individual, except for me, but more people agree with that, so that's okay. There's some problems there. Another one is guidance from others, and this can be a very quality source of answers, guidance from others, but it just depends. It can be also not so quality. Ethical philosophies and practices, I think those are important, and I think those are areas that can help guide our decision making after we have read research, or while we're reading research as well, scientific research. I talk about a moral compass, and I think this is the idea that we have innate understandings of what is right and what is wrong. For instance, you know that it's not right to take something from somebody else that belongs to them. It's something that everybody knows, although some people still do it. But this moral compass probably should be more of a guide in our lives, should be something that we follow. And then faith-based principles. And these are principles that we know from our experience with faith-based organizations or learning or that type of a thing. And so as I talk about these, though, I think for me anyway, the two bottom ones are the most important perhaps in our society. But of course you can have different viewpoints on that as well too. One quote that was given here about political problems is a pretty nice one for this topic. It would be good for many causes if scientific evidence was taken more seriously in the political realm. Yet the human problems that government exists to address are solved by choosing among options based on human values, while of course listening objectively to reality. This is from Popular Science, talking about a proposed government that would be based simply on scientific research, and how that would not work, because ultimately we would have to make decisions based on human values. And to me that goes back to this idea of a moral compass. We have a compass within us. We use that to make decisions, and we also use scientific evidence. But when it comes down to it, we have to make choices based on human values. That scientific evidence will not give us all of the answers to help solve the human problems that we are trying to address. And then Hugh Nibley continues to quote, and this one is from a more religious view, but we are not claiming that because science does not have the ultimate answers, religion does have them. What we do claim is that the words of the prophets, and I would say the words of God, cannot be held to the tentative and defective tests that men have devised for them. Science, philosophy, and common sense all have a right to their day in court, but the last word does not lie with them. Every time people in their wisdom have come forth with the last word, other words have promptly followed. And that very well follows this idea of the scientific revolutions and paradigms changing over time. We say this is the last word, and you probably heard this is the last word on the subject, or this is the paradigm that we're in. But usually other words have promptly followed. And to me that leaves open a place where we can learn there can be a different source of knowledge, and in this case he's mentioning prophets or God as a different source of knowledge. Now that may or may not be something that you believe, that God could be a source of knowledge as well, and that's fine. I just thought that this was a nice quote to talk about how that faith-based principles can also help guide us as we also study scientific findings. And just as kind of a parting thought, and this is kind of a humorous parting thought for me, maybe not so humorous, I don't know, but prayer actually works, and there is scientific research that says that. So it's kind of a blending of these two different ideas, prayer, religious practice with scientific research. And in my mind, the two don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can have faith-based understandings as well as scientific understandings, and both of them can maybe bless your life with knowledge in different ways. So this is kind of a humorous example, though, and it's a meta-analysis study looking at different types of therapeutic healing. Distant healing, including prayer and therapeutic touch, is often effective in improving patient outcomes. And you can click on the link to read a little bit more about that one, but I thought that was kind of an interesting parting thought on this topic. So does scientific research have all of the answers? Probably not, would be my response. But what's your response? It'll be interesting to hear about what you think about this topic in the discussion for this week.